I discovered that my family had been hiding my fiancé's affair with my best friend. The weight of this betrayal was unbearable, and it sent me into a spiral of shock, anger, and confusion. I made the decision to get revenge, and what unfolded was pure pandemonium. The horrific truth came to light one evening while I was going through my fiancé Alex's phone. Something didn't feel right, so I snooped, hoping I wouldn't find anything, but what I discovered shattered my world. There was a group chat between Alex, Peach, my best friend, my mother Angie, and my half-siblings, Richard and Maria. This group chat wasn't something new, it had been going on for an entire year. That realization alone was enough to make my stomach turn. A year of lies, a year of deceit, all from the people I trusted most. As I scrolled through the conversation, I saw that it had started with Alex and Peach confessing to my family that they had been having an affair. My mother, at first, seemed to show some shame and disgust towards them, or at least I thought so from her initial responses. But the shame didn't last. Instead, she asked Alex if he truly loved Peach, rationalizing that, "You can't help who you love." Really, Mom? That's the best you could come up with? It was beyond hurtful, and I felt as though my heart was breaking all over again. Alex had the audacity to say that he was sure he loved Peach, but here's the kicker, he also claimed to love me too. I gagged reading those words. It didn't stop there. Maria and Richard chimed in, casually suggesting that Alex make our relationship open. The fact that my own family was pushing for this sick idea floored me. Apparently, Maria and Richard are in open marriages, and they believe in this idea that humans aren't meant to be monogamous. They both have multiple partners, and it's all discussed and agreed upon in their respective relationships, so they saw nothing wrong with proposing the same for me. But Alex had admitted to them that bringing up the idea of an open relationship with me felt impossible at this stage, given that we were already engaged. What was worse was that my mom, my own mother, was in on this too. She suggested they cover for Alex and Peach until he felt strong enough to come to me about having an open relationship. Reading these messages, I was overcome with rage, confusion, and deep sadness. The betrayal was unbearable. I kept asking myself, how could my family do this to me? How could Peach, my best friend since kindergarten, betray me like this? I grew up with Alex. Peach knew everything about us, our relationship, our future plans. How could she convince herself to sleep with him and then say she loved him too? The thought of it made my skin crawl. And for Alex to sit there and say he loved me, too, while planning a life with her behind my back? It was revolting. I couldn't stop reading, even though every word was like a knife to my chest. I took screenshot after screenshot, capturing every disgusting detail of their conversation. Once I was done, I deleted the screenshots from Alex's phone and kept them on mine, knowing I'd need them later. The more I scrolled, the worse it got. I found out that on a recent family trip, a trip I couldn't attend because I'd been sick, Peach had taken my place. My own family had allowed this. My own mother. I was supposed to be there, but instead, Peach went and pretended to be me, and I could only imagine what they had done on that trip. The thought of my mother knowing about it and being okay with it was unbearable. That might have hurt more than the affair itself, the idea that she had known about Alex's infidelity for a year and said nothing to me. I continued scrolling through the group chat, but the more I read, the more I wanted to scream. There were too many betrayals to count, too many lies to wrap my head around. It felt like everyone I loved had turned against me. The anger I felt was all-consuming, and I knew I couldn't just let this go. I wanted them to hurt as much as they had hurt me. I wanted to ruin their lives the way they'd ruined mine. But how do you even begin to confront such betrayal? What do you even say when your entire world has been ripped apart by the very people you trust most? I was so angry that I knew if I exploded, it would make me look insane. But I didn't want to stay silent either. They needed to be exposed, and I wanted them to be embarrassed, humiliated, just as I was. Alex and I had planned 3 rehearsal dinners, one for my family and friends, one for his, and one where our families would come together. The separate dinners were to accommodate our large families and friends who had conflicting schedules. It was during these rehearsals that I decided I would strike. The hardest part of all of this was my relationship with my mother. I hated how she had acted during the entire situation, how she hadn't taken my side, her own daughter. Instead, she had willingly helped and accepted the vile behavior of my cheating fiancé and my supposed best friend. My relationship with her had never been great, at best, it was turbulent. She had emotionally and mentally abused me throughout my childhood, and when I turned 18, she apologized. I had thought we were rebuilding our bond, but now I wasn't sure if there had ever been anything real to rebuild. As I debated my next move, I was torn between disappearing from their lives entirely or confronting them head-on. In the end, I chose both. I sent all the screenshots to Alex's parents, explaining everything. To my surprise, they called me almost immediately, wanting to know if I had any hard proof beyond the confessions in the chat. I admitted I didn't have much else, but the screenshots alone were enough to shake their world as much as mine. I was asked for more screenshots, and I ended up sending quite a few of them. It wasn't a small handful. I sent a large chunk of what I had, exposing everything. Soon after, his mother contacted me, and the moment I heard her voice, I could tell she was distraught. She was sobbing uncontrollably, apologizing for her son's behavior, and the way she begged for my forgiveness made me feel awful. She was so torn apart by the situation that she couldn't even keep herself together. Her cries grew louder and more desperate, until eventually, she became completely inconsolable. Her husband, Alex's father, must have seen that she couldn't handle the conversation any longer because he took the phone from her. He asked, as calmly as he could, if there was anything his son could do to make things right. At first, I was outraged by the question. How could he think there was something Alex could do to undo the damage that had been done? But then, after a moment of reflection, I realized he was just trying to protect his son, trying to find some solution to this impossible situation. His reaction, from a father's point of view, made more sense. I took a breath and asked him if I could speak candidly. He said yes, and so I told him the truth, that unless his son could somehow disappear from my life, there was nothing he could do. The weight of my words hung in the air, but Alex's father responded with understanding. He didn't argue or defend his son, he simply accepted what I had said. Before we ended the call, I asked if they could keep this situation between us for now, at least until I had the chance to talk to Alex directly. They promised they would, and with that, the conversation ended. When I hung up, I was overwhelmed. The emotional toll was too much, and I started to feel physically ill. For a long time, I thought vomiting from stress was something that only happened in extreme cases, but now, it was happening to me. My body couldn't handle the pressure anymore. I rushed to the bathroom and began throwing up. While this was happening, Alex heard me and came to check on me. He didn't know about the phone call, but he knew something was wrong. Concerned, he woke up and gently started rubbing my back, trying to comfort me. I couldn't stand his touch. Without saying a word, I raised my hand to stop him, and he stepped back. I cleaned myself up, somehow managed to pull myself together, and then crawled back into bed. It was around 7 a.m. Even after everything, Alex was still worried. I could hear the concern in his voice when he asked if I was feeling okay. But all I saw was red, blinding rage at his audacity to pretend to care after what he had done. Despite the anger burning inside me, I kept my composure. To this day, I'm not sure why or how I did it, but I guess that's one of my hidden strengths. I can maintain control, even when I'm at my breaking point. Instead of answering him, I just ignored his questions and lay down, trying to sleep again. At 8 a.m., I forced myself to get out of bed and start preparing for the rehearsal dinner. Alex mentioned that he had a few things to take care of before heading to the restaurant, and I told him that was fine. I'd see him there later. Before he left, he paused, turned to me, and said that he loved me and was excited for the day ahead. He looked genuinely happy, like this was one of the days he had been looking forward to for a long time. I could barely stand to look at him. I replied with a simple "me too," doing my best to suppress the anger and keep my voice steady. Once he was gone, I gathered all the evidence I had, screenshots of everything. For those who don't know, there's a feature on most phones that allows you to schedule text messages to be sent at a specific time. I used that feature to send all the screenshots to everyone who needed to see them. I set the messages to go out to Peach's family, our mutual friends, Alex's family, and my own. The time I chose was 1:25 p.m., right in the middle of the rehearsal dinner, a point when people would be arriving, mingling, and bringing gifts. Despite the overwhelming stress, I knew I had to keep moving. I gathered what little strength I had left and headed to the restaurant. When I arrived, my mother and her husband were already there, waiting for me. As soon as she saw me, my mother wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. But instead of feeling comforted, I felt violated. Her touch, which was meant to be reassuring, felt like an invasion. It felt as though she was prying into my soul, disrupting the fragile walls I had built around myself. To avoid arousing any suspicion, I quickly patted her back, offering a shallow, emotionless hug in return. Then, we headed inside. Guests began arriving, and surprisingly, most were on time. The only ones running late were my grandparents, but given their age, I wasn't surprised. Once everyone was seated, Alex stood up to give a speech. He spoke about how happy he was to see everyone gathered and how excited he was for the next family dinner on June 20th. As he continued, he started talking about me, calling me the love of his life and going on about how thrilled he was that our families were coming together. Listening to him made my blood boil. I wanted to scream at him, to call him out for the hypocrite he was. But instead, I plastered a fake smile on my face and nodded along with the crowd. Next to Alex, Peach was beaming, clapping along with everyone else, looking as clueless as ever. It was unbelievable to witness in real life, the lengths people will go to maintain their lies, to act like everything is perfect while hiding their deceit beneath the surface. I could barely eat. The stress had consumed me entirely. I could feel the tension tightening around my chest, making it hard to breathe, let alone enjoy the food. Then, at 1:25 p.m., just as I had planned, the messages were sent out. Phones all around the room began buzzing, and within moments, Alex and Peach's phones were blowing up with notifications. I saw the confusion and panic spread across their faces as they checked their phones. And for the first time that day, I felt a small, genuine smile spread across my lips. It was like watching a kingdom crumble before my eyes. Their world, which they had worked so hard to protect and maintain, was falling apart, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The horrified looks on Alex and Peach's faces were golden, something I would hold on to as the one bright spot in an otherwise agonizing day. Then, all hell broke loose. My aunt, who had just seen the screenshots, lost it. She began screaming at my mother, calling her a cruel, heartless bitch over and over. My mother, now frantic, quickly checked her phone and saw what I had sent. She erupted, accusing me of trying to ruin her life, again. It was clear she still hadn't forgiven me for exposing her affair and the fallout that had followed. But the worst part was seeing my grandparents' reaction. My grandmother tried to keep the peace, helping a few other guests hold back my aunt, who was still screaming obscenities. But my grandfather was furious. He turned his anger on my mother, yelling at her, telling her that he hadn't raised her to behave this way. The whole scene spiraled out of control. People were crying, screaming, and yelling across the room. Even my bridesmaids got involved, cursing Peach out and calling her every name they could think of. I hate to admit it, but seeing the chaos unfold gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. I was filled with a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched my grandfather completely lose it and start yelling at Alex. His words were so explicit that I can't even repeat them here. As my grandfather's tirade unfolded, something inside me just snapped, and I began laughing and sobbing at the same time. It was as if my body had no idea how to handle the flood of emotions I was feeling all at once, anger, grief, shock, so it did everything at once. The tears wouldn't stop, pouring out like they had been trapped for years. My cousin, sensing the intensity of the moment, quickly pulled me outside. She moved as fast as she could, but Alex wasn't far behind, calling my name over and over, begging me to stop and explain myself. I didn't turn around, I didn't respond. My cousin shoved Alex away as he tried to get closer to the car, determined to stop us from leaving. Finally, she managed to get in the car, with me safely inside, and we sped off toward my aunt's house. Once there, she told me firmly to stay put and not answer the door, no matter who came knocking. It felt like I was a little kid being left home alone for the first time. All I could do was sit on the floor, completely drained. That's when the dam truly broke. Every single emotion I had been bottling up for the entire week came rushing out, and I just started sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know how long I sat there crying, but eventually, my aunt and cousin came back. They hugged me tightly for what felt like an eternity, 5 whole minutes of pure, silent comfort. When we finally pulled away from each other, I noticed that my aunt had a few scratches on her. It seemed like things had gotten physical between her and my mother. My aunt filled me in on what had happened after my cousin and I left. Apparently, as soon as Alex came back inside, he turned his rage toward Peach, screaming that she had ruined everything. They were shouting at each other, while some of our friends tried to intervene and pull them apart. Meanwhile, my grandparents, my aunt, and Tony, my mom's husband, were all grilling my mother, demanding answers. Tony was furious. He had been suspicious for months that my mom was cheating again, and everything came crashing down when he found out what had really been going on. Tony exploded, shouting and reading some of her messages out loud for everyone to hear. She was pleading with him to stop, saying she could explain everything, but my aunt stepped in and said that my mother had better start explaining because right now, all she saw was a selfish, worthless person. That set my mom off. She started screaming, saying how much she hated me, how I had ruined her life, how she could never be happy because I was a constant reminder of the biggest mistake she had ever made. Then, in front of everyone, she said she regretted not aborting me when she had the chance. That was it. My aunt completely lost it. For context, my aunt is infertile, and I've always been like the daughter she never had. She went full mama bear mode, ready to defend me at any cost. To her, my mother was no longer a family member, just a person who had caused too much pain. Things escalated even further after that. Tony declared he was divorcing my mom on the spot. He'd had enough, especially after learning how she had lied to him about offering my ticket for a family trip to Peach, saying I had given it up so she could take a break. It wasn't true, and Tony was done with the lies. Meanwhile, Peach exposed Alex's texts, revealing that they had been sleeping together because Alex felt like I had been growing distant. The truth was, I had been working overtime to save up for his birthday, and I thought everything was fine. He claimed he was lonely and didn't know how to talk to me about it, so he made one of the worst decisions possible. Peach's father found out, too, and began bombarding her with calls, furious that she had betrayed so many people. He decided to cut her off financially, which sent Peach into a rage, blaming me for all of it. She was convinced that I had ruined her life and was sending me venomous texts, calling me every horrible name you can think of. As for my mom, she's now going around telling everyone I'm the villain in all this, that I've destroyed her world. But she should have thought of that before condoning any of this mess. Even my half-siblings were trying to justify Alex's actions, saying humans aren't meant to be monogamous and that people love who they love. At that point, I had reached my limit. I couldn't handle any more emotional weight. I left my phone in the other room, ignoring all the calls and messages that were flooding in. My aunt offered to let me stay with her until I could figure out my next move, and I agreed. There was no way I was going back to that apartment. I emailed my landlord to arrange everything and took time off work, using up all my paid leave. My boss was understanding and told me to take as much time as I needed, which I'm thankful for because I've decided that once this is over, I need to move somewhere quiet and peaceful. My aunt and cousin are back at my place, picking up some of my things and my cat, but Alex is there, too, begging them not to take my stuff and asking me to just talk to him. I have no idea what he thinks a conversation is going to do at this point. The emotional scars he's left on me are deep, and they won't heal easily. I know I've got a long road ahead of me, especially when it comes to therapy. The next day, I woke up and took a long, hot shower, trying to cleanse away some of the heaviness. When I finally turned my phone back on, I was immediately bombarded with notifications. Before I could even process them, one of my bridesmaids called. After I answered the phone, the yelling started immediately. She was furious, shouting at me for supposedly ignoring Peach and Alex when they were in desperate need. At first, I was confused. Why should I care? I'd moved on from them. I told her to stop yelling, but she didn't. She screamed that Peach had self-harmed and had even sent me images of the cuts. The injuries were shallow but still bled enough to leave scars. I was disturbed, regardless of how superficial they were. Still, I knew Peach was doing this to rally people against me because I hadn't responded to her texts. Then she told me Alex had tried to overdose. His friends found him at my apartment, barely conscious, and took him to the hospital. Thankfully, they didn't need to pump his stomach, but they're keeping him under observation for 72 hours. It's a relief they acted quickly. Just because I can't stand him doesn't mean I want him dead. This whole ordeal has deeply divided my friend group, all because I didn't respond to their messages before things spiraled like this. Even now, I have no intention of speaking to either Peach or Alex. I don't care what they do for attention, as long as they leave me out of it. Then, in the middle of this chaos, I had a confrontation with my biological mother, who I'll now refer to as my egg donor. My friend Tony found out that my egg donor had lied to him, saying Peach could take my ticket and go with them on a trip. When they got home, it only escalated further. Tony confronted her about suspicions he'd had for a while. He thought she was cheating. She completely lost it, screaming at him and admitting everything. She confessed that not only had she been unfaithful, but my half-siblings weren't his children. Tony had to call the police to get her removed from his property. This morning, Tony called to tell me he's filing for divorce. His lawyers are already working on the papers. On top of that, she confessed to Tony that I was the result of a long-term affair she'd had with his best friend. I can't even comprehend the level of deceit. My egg donor is truly a vile person, and I'm just now realizing how deep it runs. Now that she knows Tony is serious about divorcing her, she's panicking. She's been calling my aunt, begging her to talk Tony out of it, saying she'll be homeless if he leaves her. She's also been trying to reach Tony and his family, but everyone's ignoring her. But of course, that wasn't enough. My egg donor knew my aunt's schedule and showed up at my place to confront me. She was screaming insults, attacking my deepest insecurities, and before long, I started to have a panic attack. Thankfully, my cousin was with me, and she took me upstairs to calm down. But then we heard a loud crash. My egg donor had broken through the window. She ran upstairs and attacked me. For the first time in my life, I fought back. I unleashed all the anger I'd kept bottled up for years. My cousin was trying to pull us apart, but it was so chaotic she had to run and get the neighbor to help. I've got a few scratches and bite marks, but I'm okay. I'm pressing charges and filing for a restraining order. My egg donor ran off before the police arrived, but I gave them Tony's address in case she tried going there next. It's clear to me now that these toxic people won't stop until they get a reaction from me. But I refuse to give them the satisfaction. In a bizarre twist, my half-sister called me later, trying to apologize. I cut her off because I've had enough. Then she had the nerve to ask if I could watch her kids while she, her husband, and her boyfriend went on a trip. I love my nieces and nephews, but I told her she could forget it. If she wants me to watch her kids, she'll have to ask through my aunt. She screamed at me, accusing me of punishing her kids. I told her this wasn't about them, it was about her. She then stormed off, saying I wouldn't be allowed to see my nieces. That hurt, even though I expected it. I know she'll tell them I hate them, but I've saved all the messages, and both my aunt and cousin have promised to back me up if the kids ever reach out. It's overwhelming, but I know this isn't over. One thing I've learned about my egg donor is that she hates to lose. She sees this as a defeat, and I know she won't stop until she feels like she's won. My half-brother has blocked me on everything, and I'm sure he's siding with my half-sister. Emotionally, I'm drained, but I need to document everything. The good news is I start therapy next week. My aunt and cousin are packing up Alex's things and dropping them off with his friend Kyle, who's been a solid support through all of this. He even brought me my favorite fruit this morning. He reassured me that he's done with Alex and is just holding on to his stuff until Alex's parents can pick it up. I'm grateful for his help. For now, I'm focused on getting the restraining order against my egg donor. This has been incredibly hard, but thank you for listening.